Welcome to Getting to the Truth in This Art. I'm your host, Rob Lee, and today's guest is documentary photographer and conceptual artist based in Brooklyn, New York City, and, of course, Baltimore, Isaiah Winters. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, man. I'm excited. I'm so pumped. This has been on the calendar for a few weeks now, so I'm glad that we're finally able to chat.
Yeah, and that's really what it is. It's a chat, and you know, as we talked a little bit before I pressed, literally seconds ago, before I pressed play and recorded all, we were just talking about just Baltimore. You got that vibe in your work, so not to rehash, but feel free and to put that message back in there. But for those who are undipped, uninitiated, describe your work.
Right, exactly. No, I wanted to note that I'm glad that you brought that back up, because it's not a rehashing. It's kind of, Baltimore to me has been home for about 8-9 years now. And I feel like this city, what I've noticed in my work, and as you mentioned, I like to do a lot of documentary photography. I do a lot of architectural work, a lot of play with light and color. I got my start because of the city of Baltimore. You know, I was walking around just wanting to learn more about the city and its people, and just capturing these moments of everyday life that really stuck out to me. So kind of before the whole influencer game and everything like that started, that's kind of how I got my start. And not too many people know that, but there just weren't many people walking around taking photos of everyday life here in the city. And being here throughout that time, you know, working with being part of the Be More Creatives, working with them as in my teammates, and also just the photography work that I've done, I've really focused on trying to offer a counter narrative to what's normally assumed about Baltimore. I mean, we're a city full of a ton of different neighborhoods, and there's a lot of different issues. I feel like every city has its things that they're working on. But with Baltimore, we kind of get a lot of attention, as we were saying before, once you know, there's some negativity that comes back up, or something happens in the news, and all of a sudden the cameras and everything are fixated again, not really taking note of all the amazing things that are going on in the city, you know, on the day to day, and all the artists and creatives and organizations and nonprofits, and everyone just trying to do what they can to help us, you know, as a city continue to thrive. So for me, you know, my documentary work, I'm moving into some more conceptual work, some more motion picture work here soon. And a lot of that is just, my basis is here in Baltimore. It's going to stick with me no matter where I go, just that hustle mentality, and that whole notion of having to get your own story out there, because you can't always rely on the media to show all those different aspects of the city, you know? So yeah, it's been an honor to be accepted here, and to be able to work here and just collaborate with some of the best, you know, out.
Yeah. It's interesting, like kind of touching on like how maybe the news covers things, and the I guess the way that a camera works. Right. You know, there's a limited viewpoint there. It's like, this is what you're choosing to capture. And, you know, being here, like I've always lived here and I'm a lifelong resident, and, you know, you kind of see things, and I've never been as super like demonstrative about it up until I had to be.
Exactly.
Like, you know, I went to Morgan, a lot of New Yorkers there, a lot of like DMV, and we had that weird relationship too. Mm-hmm. And weird shots. And it's like, you're choosing to go to school here. So really, is it dangerous? Like, or these goofy questions, like, is it like The Wire? It's like, literally, you're here. Like,
yeah.
So for you, so how long have you been in your practice creatively?
Right. So I have been shooting professionally now for about 7-8 years. And I'd say most of that time has been here in Baltimore. I've been fortunate enough to work with a few commercial clients and do some different work throughout the country, and a little bit of international work. But yeah, my basis has been Baltimore. I was shooting what most people believe was full time, but I was actually still in the Air Force, stationed at Fort Meade, NSA down the road, up until 2017. So through much of that time, I kind of split my time. You know, the day job was my military side of things. And then when I got home, it was photography. And for me, event photography and working with a lot of nonprofits, events, nonprofits started by women of color. Those were the people who really gave me a shot, because I don't shoot a lot of event photography now, but all of the basis and a lot of the things that I learned that set me up to move more into my fine art and editorial practice was those events and those small gigs and just learning through repetition and practice. So yeah, the city's been incredibly beneficial to me. I can't even explain it. It's like I don't know what an Isaiah Winter's artistic practice or photography practice looks like without Baltimore. Like that's an interesting question to think about,
So you touched on the Air Force. Let's talk about that a little bit. That career shift. How was that? Like, yeah.
Yeah, it was tough. So I was a linguist. I was there until 2017. As soon as my time, I finished serving. So a lot of people are confused about this. If you don't go the full 20 years in the military and retire, you separate. So I had a 6-year contract. I finished my 6 years after undergrad, and then I separated. So I did about I'd say about 4 or 5 months. I traveled cross country, packed everything up, hit a bunch of national parks. I was in Northern California, Oregon, Washington, just traveling around and really just trying to reconnect with like what it means to be a civilian. Cause military side, it's a whole different set of rules and regulations and everything. So I had to kind of, let go of that a little bit. And then for me, it was more about figuring out, okay, what do I need to do to make this a full-time transition? So I'd say mid 2017 until around 2019, I was actually working for Yelp. I was working as a community manager here in Baltimore. And that was kind of why I took that position, because it allowed me to champion small businesses and local businesses and creatives kind of doing cool things in the city and find ways to work that into, this big corporate entity that is Yelp, but they have a very specific community department that was just focused on that, just like community building and support. So during that 2-year period, once I was out of the Air Force and working for Yelp, focusing on marketing and advertising, that was when I really started preparing myself to go back to graduate school, started getting my organization and everything under control, because I'm sure you know how important that is. And now I can't live without my calendars and alerts and, notifications and all that stuff. But like, I think that 2-year gap, once I left the military, set me up to know, okay, you have to be driven. You have to set goals. You have to really be independent in a lot of cases, because there wasn't like a Yelp home office here. They're in San Francisco. So I would do my work. I worked from home. So, this whole shift with everything, I've been working from home for years. And it was more just about making sure that I set realistic goals and expectations for myself. And that kind of all translated over for me. So now that I'm no longer with Yelp, we had a great relationship, transitioned away from that. And I ended up taking a sabbatical to go work with Glacier National Park towards the end of 2019. And that was where I'd say I really made the shift to full time. Like, this is what I'm going to do. And yeah, long answer, but kind of working from, it's a weird, complicated track. And I know with a few of the other, chats that I've done, that's something that people are interested in hearing, because there's always this misconception of, I didn't start in time, or I'm getting a little bit older, or, I didn't go to art school, I didn't do this. And I think there needs to be more stories out there of people who don't necessarily take the traditional path. Like, if there's something that you want to do, you can start whenever, obviously there are things you need and there are things that you have to do, but like, don't let that be an obstacle. And for me, it was for years. Like, I really just didn't believe that I could do it. It was like, I spent so much time doing this and that. But like, really, it was only me stopping me,
Yeah. I think like this space that I'm in, like, I've been podcasting for 12 years. And when I tell people that, they look at me, it's like, why aren't you doing something else? And I was like, this is my artistic practice. And I take it and regard it as such. And also it is that period of always checking in and like, the imposter syndrome is there. It's like, is this even worthwhile? And I think these conversations are always worthwhile and always interesting,
Right.
but it's like, really, what is it? And then when I get to that space of, I am a damn artist, and
Right.
I'll just say it to myself, and it's like, but am I too old to try to get out there and start it, despite doing it since my mid-20s? And I would look at the careers of not even people that are like similar, but just the careers of people that we know, like Harrison Ford. I remember looking at the thing, and it's like he got started in his late 30s, like Star Wars. He was like in his mid to late 30s, and
it was like a fluke, like he wasn't even going for it, right?
And so I think we put this weird kind of go now. If you're not a 10-year-old prodigy in whatever your creative practice is, then you're a dinosaur. And we need to kind of get away from that, I think, because there are people who do things just at any time, and some people create their best work maybe later in life, maybe 60s, 70s, or what have you. And it's like, here's something really dope that I created. It's like, oh, you did? Really? So for your creative practice, what draws you to a project?
Oh, that's a great question. So my undergrad was in sociology. I graduated from Salisbury University over on the Eastern Shore. So been in Maryland for a bit, grade school and college. But for me, I'm a big research nerd. I get caught up in all these weird sociologically based topics like education or religion and architecture and redlining. So I usually start a concept, or I'll start to observe something. So just pay attention. And for me in Baltimore, it was really, like I was saying, that I wasn't really seeing positive, beautiful images of the city, of just everyday life. There were a lot of things going on, and there were some artists making some beautiful, incredible work. But I think for Baltimore, for that type of photography, you really saw that more in DC, New York, Philly. Like it wasn't popping off the same way here. So for me, it was more of a conversation of like, why is that? There's obviously beautiful things here in the city, and then looking into the history. So then I kind of ended up down this rabbit hole of looking at the differences between East Baltimore and West Baltimore over the last couple of decades, and the rise and fall. And then you got things like white flight and Baltimore County and the breakdown. So I really ended up down this weird rabbit hole of like, how did Baltimore City end up as Baltimore City? Yeah. And then for me, from that broad topic of what is Baltimore City, it's really, for me, I get caught up in these individual stories. So I love finding a narrative. I love finding just an individual who's doing something just out of the norm. Yeah. I have a friend who's a Black yogi, and he was one of the first Black men that I ever met that was outwardly practicing yoga. And like, he really inspired me to practice and try all these other things. And so he ended up being someone that I was fascinated with. We became friends, and now he's a frequent collaborator. Justin Temple, shout out to him. But people like that, and just meeting interesting people who are doing cool stuff that's just not that it's not getting attention, but maybe I feel that I can do something different with it, or my style can do something with it. And I think that's a conversation that a lot of people don't have as well. You are an artist. I am an artist. But I'm not a podcaster. And I think podcasting is such a huge skill and like a talent. And it's fascinating to me, all the different aspects that go into that. And I think a lot of people have a hard time realizing, well, if something is your passion or you're focused on something, that's not necessarily a weakness. I know that I have specific things in photography that I'm drawn to. I can't go out and capture every single topic. So, I'm not going to go out and get the show-stopping, image like a Devin Allen or something during the protests. Like that is his style, and that's his thing. And like, my gosh, he just has an eye for that stuff, And I think for me, it was just taking time to slow down a little bit and like think about like, what am I interested in? Because I feel like everybody gets caught up in the trends, and it's like, well, what's popular now? And it's like, don't sacrifice your ideals, don't sacrifice your interests for other things. And I think for me, it was just being like, you know what, this weird niche cult QAnon, like whatever it is that I'm researching now and I'm down this path, like just go with it. It's fine. And like, I'll figure it out or I'll move on to another project. But I think, just allowing myself to take something I'm interested in and then kind of just run with it is always it. My projects always start that way. I have like a Google Keep doc that to any normal person would look like something out of the Da Vinci Code, but I open it up and I'm like, oh, this is related to that. This is that. And like a lot of times I'll just open it up and then it'll spark something like, oh, I forgot that I was even thinking about this. So just making sure that like I either follow those paths or I immediately write them down. And they've been saying that for what, forever. You got a dream, get your dream journal. You got a thought, like write it down. But for me, that's been the biggest thing for me in terms of steering work. Yeah.
And I definitely get that. And it resonates with me because like the unique stuff, like when it's funny, like I'm a business major, I work in IT and all of that stuff. But then it's just like, I've always had this, what satiates me and what balances me out is doing something creative. Right. So, I always joke that I was one of those failed art kids. I went to the School of the Arts and it was just like, we don't really know. And I used to do comics back in the day as like a kid, like middle school.
Me too. Yes.
So, at going to Hollandtown, one of the teachers, they were like, oh, you did this by yourself? And it's like, did every of the elements. And, out of podcasting and doing everything in a very self-contained, self-controlled way, I just had more confidence in myself to just try to do different things. So I don't really have the desire to try to draw. And it's like a skill that I didn't really take to that next level, but I have a sense of humor. Outside of this, I do 2 other podcasts and, my humor is definitely reflected in this comic that I'm now writing and I have hired an artist to do. And we do it's like me and my girlfriend, we do a ridiculous cat comic and it's about cat lawyers and we have a good time writing it. And she's
never have enough cat related topics and media.
I will send you some.
Please do. I will love it. I would love it.
And it's like ridiculous and just doing it. And even going back to like setting it up, like when I decided that I wanted to get into podcasting, I was like, what's the thing that interests me?
Right.
And I was like, what can I talk about that it doesn't feel like it's work? Because when it feels like it's work, I don't want to do it. And, but feel like work, like this is work in terms of organizing things and things like that. But the actual doing part of it doesn't feel like work. It feels like fun. And so when I got into podcasting, I was like, what do I like? I like listening to the radio. I'm an audiophile, like listening to the radio and hearing those weird, like goofy stories of this happened in this random city. I was like, how can I just get a whole thing of that? And that became my niche. I like to cover weird news and pop culture. And that became the show I've been doing. And when I was thinking of developing this show, and this show came about when Trump was talking spicy to Elijah Cummings.
Oh, wow.
Baltimore. So that's why this show came out.
Right.
And I was like, what can I do? I was like, I can be mad and get black guy high blood pressure.
Exactly.
Or I could try to disprove it. And I rather disprove it. And it turns out that I'm decent at having conversations with people in the city. And
I can tell, man. I mean, I was relaxed from the second we logged on, that's a talent. It really is. Look, if for a photographer, if I schedule a portrait or a shoot with someone I don't know before the pandemic, that's like 2 hours and maybe we're only shooting for 30 minutes. Cause you're talking, you're trying to, make sure people open up to you. So that in itself is, oh my gosh, if we need like a podcaster at every set for every photography shoot. Right. Just warm, get people ready to go.
So
relax.
So you mentioned like just some of the things that you're interested in from like, it seems if I were to maybe paraphrase it, almost is like life, different pockets of life or what have you. And I want to get your take on this. What does it mean to be a black man in today's society?
Oh gosh.
It's a hard one, I know.
No, it's a hard one, but I'm ready for it and I'm here for it. And I appreciate you asking it. It's really hard. I mean, and I think if people look at my work, maybe I'm trying to I'm trying to show Baltimore's beauty and I'm trying to do all these things, but I usually played it pretty neutral and pretty safe because, there's always that argument of I'm a Black artist, but I don't necessarily always want my art to reflect the fact that I'm Black, or I don't want it always to be about that. Now, with the emergence of someone like Trump, and I think you covering pop culture, being a Black man, being from this area, I think a bunch of us took notice of like something is off here, something's different, and something really bad is going to happen. And I feel like it almost was like I was compelled or pulled towards making work that leans more towards speaking about my experience. And I think with my photography, that can be difficult sometimes because I'm really just trying to show frames of life, moments of life. My photography should, and I want it to read as almost as though it's just like a frame from a still from, a film just about life or a topic or like a specific, moment in time. So with me, I think as opposed to just reflecting how difficult it is to be a Black man in today's society, I mean, I don't have to explain to you how hard it was with the Floyd, the video itself. First off, I mean, I avoided it as long as I could, and I saw it by mistake. And it was like, I really didn't want to see a public lynching that now the whole world has seen. So that changed a few things. And I think just having to respond to the fact that we've been speaking and kind of shouting about a lot of these issues and concerns forever and ever, and our parents and our grandparents and everyone has been saying it, just to come to the realization that people were just now being like, oh, this has been going on. How absurd, how crazy. And it's like, it took everything that I thought I knew about friends and family and life and community and all of that. And it kind of shook things up a bunch because it was like, it was a weird sense where it's like, I don't know who to trust. Do I even trust myself when it comes to create? Like, do I even want to make work right now? Right. It just was one of those things that could have defeated, was almost like defeating in a sense. And I love that you mentioned the response to Trump talking to Elijah Cummings, because that was another moment where it was like, oh no, like you don't know where this is. This is not DC. This is not like, do not do that. Don't do that here. We really value and cherish our leaders here who are just trying to, they're fighting. They're trying to do the same thing. So I think for me, just acknowledging of where I've come from, where I am now, and the little bit of platform that I have, just trying to use that in a way that turns attention towards some of these things. So these things that I assumed people knew about, institutional racism and the fact that we're going to be treated differently in a restaurant. Like these are not fairy tales. We're telling you these are real things. I think for me, it nudged me in a way where it was like, instead of just assuming that people understand everything, maybe I need to be a little bit more direct with some of my beliefs or some of my work. So less so, I mean, I've had a few projects recently that are leaning more towards that, but I definitely think the work coming out in 2021 that I've really been sitting with and like holding on to for a bit is a lot more targeted. And I think a lot more targeted and a lot more targeted to Baltimore specifically, just because I think I just don't know what else I would be doing. And I don't know what else I would be doing that would have a bigger impact right now. I think just the city deserves it. Yeah.
It's interesting. Like, what I aim to do and, the stuff that I do is be able to critique stuff and be able to have like, I always can find something that's rough and get humor out of it somewhere. That's a skill that I try to cultivate, and I'm okay at it. So I remember when like Freddie Gray went down, and me and my co-host for the show we were doing called Metrocast, and it was just like we're both named Rob, and it was kind of like just two guys named Rob, and it went through 3 different name changes. It was called Two Rob Crew, and then Extraordinary, and it just had different names, and eventually we settled on Metrocast. And that was the show where we were kind of covering this like Trump ascent. And I was looking at it one way, and my co-host was kind of just like, nah, it's not going to happen. Nothing's going to happen with this. I was like, are you sure?
Right.
And I remember we were doing a podcast, and we both got either a message or something that hit our phones at the same time we were wrapping up the podcast, and it was about Freddie Gray and that the whole situation. And
right.
you know, at that point, when it had first went down, and I was just like, nah, that's not anything different. I was like, it's odd that we're getting the message here. And I was like, I don't remember who sent it or whatever, but it's just been like this cycle of, in the way that I've described it is, when you see these things on video, these racially imbued acts of terrorism on video, you almost want to believe it's a film. It's right. That it is shot in such a way. It's like, this isn't real, right? We don't do that.
Like how? And then
it's like, oh, we do. And it was just, you know, you try to navigate through these things, and you know, I'm a 6'4", 300-pound black man, and I have to remind people of this. Like, you know, in an office environment, usually I'm working with people who are different from me, white women a lot of times, and I'm going to be the tallest person in there, largest person in there, and I'm very cognizant of that. So when the notion of threatening black guy comes up, right, I'm aware of that. So whenever I have a meeting, I'm sitting down.
Right.
And I have to do those different things. And these are these small things that we don't really talk about, because when it's presented, we have a habit of switching the conversation to another thing instead of looking at multiple things at one time, or looking at the elephant in the room, because
it's painful.
Yeah,
it really is. I'm so glad that you brought that up. And I think, I feel like just through the industries and the fields that we're working in, and the arts in general, that tends to be the case, where we're the vast minority in a lot of cases. And I think that's just been tough. You hit it right on the head, where it's like, it's uncomfortable to even discuss a lot of these things, because as I was saying, like, are people going to even believe me? Are we going to even do anything about it? Is it worth just making myself seem vulnerable, which we all are. And I think expressing those things more normally is overall going to be a better thing. But it's just this whole notion that we're always playing with. And then you got Du Bois, and you got double consciousness, and like, we're always flipping, the ways that we process and interact with other people. So I think with Freddie Gray, and I was out there just to document some of that. And really, I didn't really go out until it was the peaceful protests. And then when CNN and all the other networks came in to kind of still get a little bit more of like, oh, well, look at the CVS. Well, look at that. And that I will never forget that day where I am my camera's turned at one of the CNN film crews, and like, everything's peaceful and calm. And then like, two people just start getting, riled up in this crowd of hundreds. And then they're just go, like this, like, get them. And it was like, oh my gosh, they're documenting us as though Baltimore is like some kind of zoo, and they're just here to document the chaos. And it was like, no. And obviously this isn't a new notion of people needing to have their own story and have their own documentation. I mean, it's the reason the civil rights movement started and took traction, and the feminist movement, all these different movements. I think there's so much power in us as Black creatives, Black men, Black women, people of color in general, just different marginalized groups, being able to tell their own stories in their own neighborhoods and their homes, and get that out there, because the status quo is not made for us, and all this stuff is not made for us. We can sit here and say, oh, standardized testing is, but like, well, look at everything. Nothing is made for us. And so, I think just at least I know Freddie Gray started me on that journey. And then with Floyd, it kind of just snapped something in me, where it was like, I can't tolerate it anymore. I can't be that quiet guy. And I just can't not say anything. It's too like insulting and painful on so many levels, and the fact that this is documented right here, 8+ minutes, clear 4K. And I say this to everyone, 4K footage. We watched this man go out. And then people still be, well, what did he do? Well, he should have just paid attention. With what we just saw with with the insurrection, it's like, this is what we were saying. It doesn't matter what he did. He was never going to be treated with the respect and concern that he, deserved.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that these conversations are going to continue to happen. And I love that there just seems to be so many people stepping up to this moment, and not that people weren't before that, but I think just in the same way it was like, well, maybe I know that I leaned away from some of these topics. Yeah. Now it's like, I don't really care. This is what I care about. And like, if people don't like that, or it's too political or whatever, then like, that's fine. I appreciate the support in the past. I'm going to keep moving.
So I was on that wave of hitting my, it'll be at the end of the month, it'll be 12 years. And when I got to that whole period, I was like, all right, let me do a tour. Let me start doing guest spots and all of that stuff. And I've had certain podcasts hit me up. I literally do a comedy podcast about dick jokes. And I've had, guys, once I started doing this and being very kind of picking a side, not saying I wasn't picking a side, but being very like, no, if you got a question, this is what it is. I'm a black man and this is how I feel.
Right.
And I got deemed, oh, you're a little radical, or you're a little, and I was like, appreciate it. And enjoy your neckbeard podcast. I'll continue saying things that are real.
Yeah.
So, and this is, and I think I already got the answer, but maybe make it a bit more concrete, just for those in the back. What's your take on the role of photographer during political uprisings and social justice movements?
I think that it is so necessary, but I caution people, and I've said this, I'm currently in grad school. I don't even know if we touched on that right now, but I'm in my photography cohort. And around the time that George Floyd happened, we were just starting up. We started in the summer of 2020. So we had these discussions, and they were hard conversations. And I am one of 2 Black men in my year of my cohort. And yeah, it's Parsons, it's an art school. So there's not going to be many of us to begin with. So they were very hard conversations. And when these topics would come up and my classmates would ask me, I would say, I'm fine with people documenting. Make sure you know what you're documenting, what purpose it's going to serve, who are you? And not to say that people who are white can't go out and document Black struggle and Black protests and all these things, because some of the best civil rights photographers were white men, Jewish men. You have like a photographer like Danny Lyons. You have all these people. You have people working with Gordon Parks and others back. There's so many ways that we can get tangled in. And who is this? Who's able to represent that? But I think with social media and with all the different things going on now, there's this constant rush for people to just be shocking, or to have that next big shot, or have that next big moment. And it's like, you really have to, as a photographer, and especially as a documentary photographer, I know I get caught up, in the weeds and just ruminating on this stuff, because it's like, am I the right person am I even, justified in telling the story? Am I trying to steal someone else's narrative? Because, the number one thing that upsets me is people being offended on my behalf, or trying to tell stories, on my behalf without even asking, how I feel about it. So I love the emergence of, not even the emergence, the democratization of photography and shares and information getting out there to the public. But I lean on the side, and maybe this is the more conservative side of things, is be careful, because there's a lot of it's like, what great power comes great responsibility. Yeah. I'm a comic guy. I'm a Spider-Man forever. I live and die by that same phrase when I go out and I take an image, because you never know what that'll be used for. And aside from that, there were so many protesters who were arrested from images of social media photographers and media photographers going out there, not realizing you're not supposed to show people's faces like that if you don't have some type of consent. And you can make the argument that, oh, it's a public space, but think about that power. You, through no even thought or care, now someone who was maybe protesting on a side that you agree with is in jail, or they're going to be fined. So yeah, there's a lot that people need to think about. And I think social media is toxic. We know it is, but we all have to use it.
Yes.
Be careful with what you're sharing out. And I got some of the best advice of my life from a photographer I really respect. His name is Toots, and he's based in New York, and he's been covering the Bronx and women of color and portrait. Like, he's just, this guy is the best. And I met him early on in my career, and I'm fortunate enough to still call him a friend and a mentor. And one of the things that he taught me, and I stick to, is, a lot of photographers say it, but like, really practice it. When you get an image that you like, or you get something, sometimes you just have to sit on it. Mm-hmm. You can't just post everything as soon as you're getting it. Sometimes those correlations don't come right away. And sometimes you don't even realize what you have right away. And I think that some of the images that have come out with these protests and others and things that, certain things that have come out, I think if those photographers had more time to think about it, maybe they would have made a different decision. Or maybe they would have represented things differently, or at least had some type of cultural, I don't want to call them like a cultural liaison, but just some context for what it is that you're capturing, because there's nothing more cringe than you just got people going into neighborhoods that they don't know anything about, and they're watching The Wire, and they're looking down at their, and it's like, what are you actually trying to do here? Because what you're telling me you're doing without telling me is you're trying to capture stereotypes, and you're trying to capture just all these complicated things without any type of understanding of it,
I remember, you need a cultural shirt, bro. I wanted to get that in. But also the podcast I was referring to earlier. So when they had the situation there at Oriole Park and that whole area,
right?
It was interesting because my co-host, he was down there at the game, and he's like, "This is what happened." He's like, "I don't give a shit what the city paper posted."
Oh, I lived across the street. Yeah, it was a lot different. Yeah,
and he was just like. He's like, I told someone my hands are rated E, everybody can get them. And he's like, that's what it was. He's like, he's like, these angles are really weird. And it was funny because stuff was coming out real time and faster than the news outlets were able to get it out there. Right. So it's like, yeah, who's going to be held accountable for this? Who's delivering this for traction and so on? So leaving from that, I got a few last questions here. So let's see. I want to hit your, what do you, if you have one, mm-hmm. and I've heard this is a thing. What is your most useful, and I think you already said it, I think you referenced Toots and with this, but what is your photographic mantra?
Oh man. Oof. That is a tough one. I would say, I guess I sort of touched on it, but I think for me, Joel Meyerowitz, so this is a 1970s photographer, and he actually has been shooting color film for a while. White dude, he's in his 70s now. Mm-hmm. He had a huge reemergence around the time of 9/11, where he went into ground zero, and a lot of those famous images, those color images, were taken by him that day.
Oh, wow.
And he was he's just a documentary photographer, everyday photographer, was just out and really was able to capture, like, this is what is happening, regardless of what you're seeing, on the news. And for him, I've recently, the pandemic has opened up this weird thing where now people are a lot more accessible in a lot of cases. Yeah. And so I got to watch Instagram live that he did, which I would never, he's in his 70s, all these people are getting hooked up, and it's funny because they had there were technical difficulties and stuff, and but they got it all worked out. And one of the things that he said is when he's going to capture an image that he knows this is what he wanted to capture, it's not necessarily a thing of all right, my settings are right, everything's right. It's a feeling, and it's cheesy and it's weird to anyone, that doesn't shoot photography. But for me, when I take an image, if you look at a photo and it's on my feed or it's on my website, I was literally holding my breath when I took that image. And it's almost like you get things set up, and then I'm waiting for that perfect Zen moment where you just feel it. Yeah. In that second, there's no hesitation. And, that's kind of, he boiled it down to he gets this swelling of him, he was much more poetic with it, yeah. But it's essentially one of those things where I don't take an image. And this is a fact that I don't think I've ever shared. If I'm in a portrait setting or I'm shooting with people, and I go to take an image and it doesn't feel right, I will still, I'll do the 3, 2, 1. I just won't take it. And like, we'll go again. Yeah. So like for me, you have to feel it. And like, it's not even like, oh, this minute I'm feeling it, like I'm inspired. It's like a split second thing for me. And I think it is for a lot of photographers. Photographers don't, it's weird because people don't talk about their process and everything, but we're so superstitious and we're so particular. You know, you look at baseball players and athletes and they got, they're rubbing their chain and they're doing all this. Photographers and artists do the same things. We just do them in different ways, So like, yeah, I have a weird thing where I'm just like, everything has to just be perfect. And like that breath is held and then it's done. And then I'm just, relief.
It's a little Nomar Garcia Parra there. And it also sounded like the thing when you watch a movie version of like what a sniper does. It's like, it's like up and I'm going to take and bang. It's like, no, wind's off.
Right. And then you get up and walk. I've gotten into the process, like I'll get it and I shoot on film. So it makes it much easier because it's so expensive. I'll take it. And then I don't even let myself second. It's just like, it's done. You got it. It's done. Yeah. And sometimes I didn't get it, but like, you know what? Following that mantra over the last few years, when I get a rollback, I'm like 70, 80%. Like I got what I needed. And when I was shooting digital, and you're shooting 100 pictures of the same thing, you're getting like a 10%, cause it's like, oh, this could be perfect. And it's just like, no, man, just trust yourself. Right. And just do it,
Trusting your talent.
We all have it. Yeah, we have it. Just trust it.
So this is the last question that I have. What are, I don't want to say just number one because that's going to be a hassle. What are, let's say maybe 3 of your favorite areas to shoot in Baltimore?
Okay. That's a really good one. I love to shoot. Gosh, and this has changed a bit because I'm thinking about the pandemic and I'm like, gosh, I haven't really gone out to a lot of places. One of my favorite places to shoot is probably the Greenmount West area with all the, there's so much graffiti, things like that. Just the architecture with the mixture of, you got your trees and everything. I love that mix of city and like the outdoors and nature at the same time. So I like to shoot over there. North Ave has to be one of my favorite places to shoot. There's just always something going on around North Ave, It's just, it's lively. And even when even with the pandemic and everything going on, like it's just busy. And I love that. And I love just life, the feeling of there being life. Downtown doesn't really get as that busy. So I wouldn't say that I shoot downtown all that much. Let's say one more place. You know what? The area, and this is still North Ave, just way in a different location near Baltimore Cemetery. Yeah. And I think that's one of my most recent posts, but like, I think it's a mixture of different factors. I love just seeing Black people out and about living their lives and not necessarily kind of catering themselves to other demographics. It's just like people out just chilling. You got a lot more of the like bodega like setups out there, which reminds me of Brooklyn and that homey feel as well. And that sense of community, like I don't think people understand how much community is built in, some of these locations, some of these corners and whatnot. And I think it's an unfortunate reason, but I find I just am so drawn to old signage and businesses. And I love shooting over there, but I also hate it because you have all the old signage and businesses and boarded up things because of the shifts from, all these number, these different factors, a number of reasons. So for me, I love capturing that because I want people to see it and I want people to see why it's like beautiful, but not at the same time. And I want people to understand like what is going on in these areas as opposed to just what they see on the wire. So kind of a mix of locations. I like Mount Vernon is where I go if I just want to be, I don't want to say lazy, but like if I just want to stroll around and like practice taking pictures, there's always going to be light hitting, but it's designed that way. And like, that's who lives, Mount Vernon is kind of Mount Vernon for a set reason. So yeah, a bit of that. And then sometimes I'll go into the county. Sometimes I'll mess around in like Dundalk and stuff too. There's a lot of old businesses and whatnot just outside the city that I like.
Well, that's great, and some of my favorite areas to look at. So, I like to give every guest on this podcast a chance to shamelessly plug your website, your Instagram.
Nice.
Feel free. So, the floor is yours.
Yes, I appreciate it. So you all can find my newish work. I gotta update it, but my website is www.isaiahrw.com. So it's ISAIAHRW.com. And that's the same exact spelling for my Instagram. So it's at IsaiahRW. You can find me there. I'm also at the Be More Creatives for people who aren't familiar with that account as well. And that's just the Be More Creatives. We're over on that side doing more community-based work and shares and whatnot. But yeah, that's kind of me. That's where you can find my work. And please feel free to reach out. I know things are weird now, but like people DM me if you have a question about a certain film or a camera. Like I love that. I eat it up. Just let me know. I'll help you find your dream camera setup. So yeah, check me out in those places.
So that's it. I'll do my sign off for Isaiah Winters. Thank you for coming onto this podcast.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
This has been Getting to the Truth in This Art, saying that there is art anywhere, photography everywhere in Baltimore. You just have to look for it.